Okay. Happy New Day, world. Hey, y'all. Happy New Day. It's Brennan J. Lewis coming at you live from, well, my destination. All right, y'all. So we're going to go ahead and get into our book read. Happy Wellness Wednesday. It's a beautiful day in my world. I'm so happy and thankful to be in the land of the living. I don't know about you, but there's so many great, amazing things happening in this world today. Um, I'm not going to get into the politics of it all, but give thanks, right? Give thanks every day. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to read Humble Consulting How to Provide Real Help Faster by Mr. Edgar Schein. We've been reading this book for quite a while now. We are in the third chapter. We're in the third chapter talking about the need for a trusting and open level 2 relationship. My son said, "Mommy, you got to do your book reads again. You got to help the people." And I have my books that I read in the morning. I have some that I listen to during the day, and some that I read at night. And he said, "You should do it in the morning so you can help people on their way to work." I think 8:30 is a little late, but whoever this is for will capture something that will help them along their way, right? Okay, we're gonna start on page 59. We're talking about the lesson. So yesterday we delved into a case study, and now we're gonna talk about the lessons from those case studies. I hope that you all are going back and listening to um, these reads, or at least reading on your own time, right? Okay, here we go. Let me get my marker and my pen. I believe we will get through everything today. Put my okay. All right. My highlighter rather. I like to highlight stuff. All right, lessons. The experience I have recounted above is probably the most important learning experience of my whole consultation career. Okay, let me go back. So, yesterday, there was an organization that was attempting to help more people, and it was a young company, but they didn't take the time out to listen to the needs of the people. Um, they were a group of engineers, and they didn't have the skills necessary to run an effective and efficient corporation at whole. And so once they begin to listen to their workers and employees, things begin to change. Once they begin to get more personal um, and communicating effectively, things begin to get better. So let's talk about the lessons. So this is Mr. Edgar Schein talking right now about his lesson. So he says, the experience I have recounted above is probably the most important learning experience of my whole consulting career, because it showed me the power of giving up my own model, learning to listen to what the client group was trying to do, and then doing something that helped them to do what they wanted to do. To get to that point, I had to give up my scientific concept of a good group. I had to remind myself that this group was different and has its own agenda. I had to force myself to become interested in and curious about that agenda, and realize that my job was to understand that agenda and help them achieve it. Happy New Day, Henry. How you? All right. This realization was paradoxical because in assessing my ignorance and becoming curious, I was actually being a better scientist than when I was imposing what prior research had shown to be what a good group should look like. A second powerful lesson was that I could make a small change in their process that would have a big impact on their ability to manage the content. I often thought that this missing I often thought that this meeting was where I invented the concept process consultation. As I look at it now, it was a clear case of HC. Again, HC, y'all, is humble consulting. Thank you. I love the sunflowers and the sunshine and the sun. And I'm glad you are doing well, God brother. He says, I humbled myself to their needs. I allowed myself to get curious. I wanted to help them, and then found an effective adaptive move unconsciously. His third lesson is, my help did not hinge on special expertise. I was functioning more as a catalyst at the flip chart and was illustrating something that they could do for themselves. Is it worth noting that this occurred in the late 1960s when group facilitation and the use of flip charts was only slowly replacing the blackboard and people taking their own notes? The group quickly adopted the procedure of having one of them go to the flip chart at subsequent meetings and tracking the discussion. With equally good results, I was achieving one of the most important helping goals of facilitating learning how to learn. Page 60, how not to consult with DEC, the MAC project. Okay, so this is another case. We're going to talk about this case. This is another case we're going to talk about, and then we're going to go into the lessons again. And then I believe after this, there's going to be another case and then some more lessons. All right. I closed this section on DEC with two failures: Management Analysis Corporation's, MAC's inability to help DEC and my inability to help MAC. Toward the end of the 1960s, as DEC was growing rapidly, Ken Olsen decided that having an outside consulting firm took a look at us made sense. Take a look at us made sense. There were enough strategic issues floating around that it seemed wise to Ken and the operations committee to bring in some management consultants to diagnose the situation and maybe make some recommendations. Mac was a highly respected Cambridge consulting firm consisting of full-time consultants, working closely with principals who were Harvard Business School professors and partners in MAC. The DEC project was to be coordinated by Professor Vansel and was to examine DEC's organization. Ken asked me to be helpful to Mac and to facilitate whatever coordination might be needed. Over the next several months, Mac did a thorough job of interviewing senior management and analyzing the data. In my role as liaison with the Mac project team, I sat in on the sessions where they analyzed the interviews to reach a diagnosis to help develop their recommendation. As a strategy consultant, Mac felt they had to make a recommendation to fix all the problems they saw. They concluded that the primary solution for DEC was to appoint and empower a strong marketing VP. I tried to argue that given what I had learned about the DEC's culture, making any recommendation might be a problem. I suggested that Mac should instead focus on clarifying the problems and the costs of not fixing them, but let DEC wrestle through them to its own solution. DEC managers with their academic orientation did not like anyone telling them what to do, as I have found many times over, but they did listen to the data. Tell them what will go wrong if they don't centralize marketing, stimulate their thinking. I also pointed out to the MAC group that DEC had tried various people in senior managing marketing roles, but they always undermined them because deep down they distrusted marketing, symbolized by the remark Ken made that marketing is just lying to people instead of solving their problems. The Mac consulting company culture, however, demanded that a structural recommendation be made, or we did not do our job. Professor Vansel and I debated this issue at length, but he was convinced that the recommendation for a marketing VP made so much sense and was so well backed up by the data that it clearly would be proper to make the recommendation first and then back it up with 50 or so transparencies that would make the case. The MAC people worked for hours to make the presentation outstanding, and they rehearsed it so that it would be obvious how the recommendation had been reached. Vansel assured that I did not know how consulting worked and therefore rejected my proposal and invited me to watch us work and learn. Though Ken had wanted me to be helpful to them by being a liaison, clearly Mac neither needed nor wanted my help. I learned that if someone does not want help, there is little you can do to get them to accept it. I'm going to read that again. He said, I've learned that if someone does not want help, there is little you can do to get them to accept it. And I've learned the same thing. Through trial and error, trying to help people down through the years, I have learned, listen, if people don't want the help, there is nothing I could do to make people accept what they don't want. When Mac indicated that they were ready, the operations committee gave them a 2-hour slot at the beginning of one of their regular meetings. Professor Vansel and one of his Mac colleagues were set with their overheads presentation and, in the best tradition of management consultants, led with their primary recommendation, the creation of the marketing VP. Ken Olsen listened politely for a few minutes and then, before more than one or two of the overheads could be presented, thanked the Mac group for their work, and dismissed them. I was shocked at the abruptness, but not surprised, given my own experiences with trying to tell the DEC things. Various detailed written reports were later provided to DEC, and individual managers concurred with much of what Mac had learned. But the primary recommendation went nowhere. And the power of all the data was lost in the shuffle. A few weeks later, Ken Olsen wrote a long memorandum to Vansel terminating the Mac contract. The letter basically thanked Mac for its efforts, but noted that most of what Mac said, DEC already knew. Wow. Okay, so here's the lessons in that. One, in retrospect, what Mac had done was to treat DEC's problem as a simple technical structure issue, for which a simple solution was the obvious answer. They had not noticed that the DEC culture of empowering managers and giving them lots of autonomy, combined with a founder who was reluctant to give up absolute control, made the empowerment of a single marketing VP impossible. DEC had in fact tried that and found that the person in the job was undermined by both product managers and Ken himself. The DEC culture was a complicated matrix in which all major problems that required a decision were a priori complex and messy. Somehow, the level 1 interviews had completely missed this. The second lesson, I had formed a level 2 relationship with Ken, which made it quite natural that he would ask me to be liaison with Mac or MAC. But there was clearly no level 2 relationship between Ken, who was the client, and Mac's or MAC's principal consultants. They took the project and ran with it on the basis of their professional understanding of what good level 1 consulting is. Ken had told them I would be liaison and would help, but that was an offer, not a response to a request by MAC. They had not heard the implication of Ken's offer, namely that I knew a lot about the DEC culture and how to work within it. The third lesson, I tried to form a level 2 relationship with Professor Vansel, who was the official head of MAC project, by offering to reveal what I knew about DEC. Not only did he decide to ignore what I knew about the DEC culture, but he specifically told me that I did not understand consulting, that my views of DEC's resistance to being told what to do was irrelevant in the face of his overwhelming case, and by implication that I should learn from watching MAC perform. That sounds very familiar. And I'm sure that many of us can relate to that. Vansel clearly did not want a level 2 relationship with me, which illustrated clearly for me that a relationship works only when both parties are willing to be at the same level. Fourth lesson, I also learned from this experience that clients already know a lot about what outsiders bring to them. Some don't want to be told what they think they already know, while others hire the consultant to confirm what they know and plan to do. That way, if it goes wrong, they can blame the consultant. It is these perceptions that feed all negative humor about consulting, telling you the time by studying your watch. Furthermore, the client's failure to act on what they know and or to accept the recommendations of the consultant's results, not from ignorance, but from incompatibility between what the existing culture will allow and what the recommendation or what the recommended solution is. An organization can only do what is consistent with its culture. A point that is completely missed by the MAC's diagnosis and recommendation. Fifth lesson, he says, I learned that being professional and keeping appropriate distance between the helper and the client can be a terrible trap. I am especially suspicious when a boss tells me that his subordinates always tell him the truth because it is their professional responsibility. I have heard surgeons claim that their nurse and tech would always tell them if something was wrong, and have had the same nurse tell me, no way. Sixth lesson, minimal harm was done in this case, and there are undoubtedly work situations and helping situations where it is not necessary to develop level 2 trust and openness. But even here, it seems to me that it would have been safer to have a level 2 discussion between Bantle and Ken in which the groundwork could have been laid for at least listening to the presentation. Unfortunately, there was little further communication between Bantle and me, so I never found out what MAC's reaction to their dismissal was. All right, so we're going to get into case number 4. And we're going to go into some more lessons. We are talking about the need for a trusting and open level 2 relationship in corporations. I'm going to see if I can get through this chapter. I believe we can before 9 o'clock. All right, yeah, case number 4. Implementing a new IT technology in bank operations. This case taught me some important lessons about how difficult it is to define a problem clearly and solve it when a situation is complex, messy, and constantly changing. I was brought into the bank by Carlos, who had been a Sloan Fellow at MIT and had done his thesis with me, so I knew him very well. When he became a senior VP of international operations of one of the largest U.S. banks, he asked me to come to New York on a regular basis to help me become a better manager by attending my meetings, observing me, and giving me feedback and advice on how to run a better operation. Our relationship thus began with me coaching an individual executive and by implication his group of immediate subordinates. I would spend up to a day a week visiting his organization. A day a week visiting his organization, sitting in on his meetings to provide whatever help I could to make him and his group more effective. I'm just highlighting for my own benefit. The problems that the group generated were the typical ones of agenda management, participation, and decision making. Right? We see this pretty much in every organization. Every organization. Like when I was in the hospital, we had to do incentives all the time to get people to come to events. We had to do giveaways, raffles, special employee benefits, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, back to the story. He says, I would provide occasional feedback during the meetings and then review Carlos's style with him after the meeting. Whereas Ken Olsen at DEC had left me to my own devices, Carlos was much more dependent, counting on me to help him improve his skills and help his group become more effective by frequently inquiring how he was doing and how the group was going. Carlos was my primary client, but I had to get to know the group as well in order to be helpful. And getting to know the group members individually and collectively, right? And getting to know the group members individually and collectively, I always aimed for a level 2 relationship. Carlos also asked me my opinions about specific members of his team. Something that I had warned him I would not do because I was not an expert at assessing individuals. If he insisted, I would turn this into a coaching session by asking him to talk out his own evaluation and help him to clarify his own assessment of his people. I like that. All right, y'all, page 68. The new information system. Again, y'all, we talking about the need for trusting an open level to relationship. So Carlos decided to implement a new information system that would replace all the paper files that his 15 clerks use for all their overseas transactions. Each of the clerks worked with 5 to 10 banks and financial institutions all over the world and used one manila folder for each of those customers. Wow. As requests for money transfers came in, they would pull those files, rifle through the material, and then make the transaction on their desktop computers. The new IT system would be implemented as part of a much larger program of updating the operations functions of the bank by replacing most of the paper files. The system allowed clerks to see several documents on the screen at one time, so they could work on several cases at once without having to pull files at once all the time. To use the new system, the clerks had to enter all their paper file information into the new system. Carlos then asked me to observe and interview the clerks to identify possible sources of resistance as they were sent off to training for the new system. I had by that time gotten to know most of the people and was trusted as a helper, not a management spy. I suddenly found myself in the midst of a planning. I finally found myself in the midst of a planned change project and could observe directly what could go wrong. For example, in order for the clerks to be working with several clients at the same time, they first had to learn to enter all the information on each client into the system and learn how to bring up several pieces of information simultaneously. I was just thinking, working on different clients at the same time, like that could be messy, but that's just my personal opinion. Let me get back to the story. The manila folders were to be thrown away once all the information was in the system. However, it took a long time to learn how to do all of this, and the clerks felt they never had enough time to both learn the system and get all their routine work done as well, which I can personally understand it. They varied hugely in their ability to adapt to the new system. Even after the clerks had been officially trained, I saw many clerks secretly continuing to hold on to paper files, right? Because we don't want to depend on a system completely. But anyway, so he says, I saw many clerks secretly continuing to hold on to the paper files, which they claimed were easier to manipulate than the computer screen. Some of this had been anticipated, and Carlos dealt with it in a typical Lee managerial way by insisting that the practice of using the paper files, the paper folders, should stop. But he was not enforcing the directive. Carlos wanted to be a nice manager, and I could see the dysfunction in what he was doing. But I also knew that the paternalistic culture in which Carlos had grown up made his style something that I could not change directly without deeply offending him. So here are the lessons, and I'm looking forward to hearing these lessons. So the first lesson, he says, I saw an instance of what I had read about in planned change programs. If you don't involve the people who have to make the change in the planning of how it will be accomplished, they will find it difficult to do and will resist it in various ways. So, for my reference, now I know that I need to involve people in making change in planning so that they understand how it will be accomplished. That's a good lesson. Second lesson, I also learned that the client sometimes does not have an accurate sense of when to ask for help. Instead of deciding to implement the IT system and then asking me to help, Carlos should have asked me what kinds of things might come up before he made the decision. We had to deal with the diversity of talent in the group for this kind of computerized work and the various forms of resistance that emerged. As it turns out, Carlos was not the kind of manager who could enforce his directives, right? Because you have different people. You have different people in the world. Some understand technology and some don't. Some people are computer savvy and some people are not. Some people are community people, like up front in person, and some people are behind the desk people. You know, they'll talk to you over the phone, but they ain't trying to see you in person, right? So we have to be able to accommodate the different complexities. Well, not complexities, but the diversities that exist in the world. 68. The humble No, the emerge of super clerks. It then developed that some clerks. Okay, wait a minute, wait. Oh, okay, those were the lessons. Okay, so here's something else. Excuse me. The emergence of super clerks. It then developed that some clerks really liked the system and could do much more work on the computer as they got comfortable with the system, right? Leading Carlos and the IT people to decide to create a small cadre of super clerks who could do all the work, which of course made many other clerks redundant. Carlos then asked me to help him figure out how to retrain the redundant clerks because he said that the bank had a no layoff policy that was strongly implemented by his immediate boss. The super clerk idea could not be implemented until the redundancy problem was solved. Various efforts were made to retrain or outplace the redundant clerks, but months went by without any substantial progress. The super clerks and the regular clerks worked side by side while efforts continued to reduce the size of the pool. Here's the lessons with that. My client revealed sides of himself. This is the first lesson. My client revealed sides of himself that I had not been aware of because up until then, no circumstances had arisen that would test him. Carlos was not aware of the bank's no layoff policy and had not counted on his boss being completely committed to it. Carlos was also the kind of manager who would not challenge his boss on such matters, so he slowed the project down while he tried to find ways of retraining the people. The second lesson, I found myself playing a variety of different helping roles. With the clerks, I was observing, asking them questions, and occasionally making a suggestion. Okay. With Carlos, I was being a coach and educator. I was being a coach and educator to get him to see some of the unanticipated consequences of his decisions to implement the new system. With respect to the IG project, I found myself in the middle of it as a participant and pawn adapting as best I could to the new circumstances as they emerged. Page 69. A new boss and a surprise. Sometime during the second year of this project, Carlos's boss left and was replaced by a new boss who, as he looked over the project's struggles to become productive, suddenly announced that the bank did not, in fact, have a layoffs policy and that they should go ahead with installing the super clerks, retraining those who could be retrained, and firing others. Ooh. Surprise, surprise. The layoffs policy that we had been taking for granted had either been just the personal values of the previous boss or the bank had put into effect a major policy change that Carlos was not aware of. In any case, none of this had been anticipated or planned for. See, look at that. Policy change, retraining. So we got to retrain those who can be retrained, and we got to lay off those who need to go. Right? And install those who are capable of doing the work. I'm really enjoying this case study. And I'm learning so much from the lessons. I hope that you all are learning. Happy new day. Hey. And so, this is helpful in so many different ways. So Carlos then wanted me to help him with his task force, finish the design of the new job of super clerk, decide how many clerks to keep, and make plans for laying off the ones who would be redundant. I had to learn. No, he says, I had learned from my experience with DEC that things can change unexpectedly, but I had never before encountered a situation in which the changes had such a direct impact on what my client wanted to do. Nor had I worked with a manager who was so ready to go along with what his bosses and expert helpers, the IT people, wanted. Had I seen any of this coming, I would have spoken up, but it happened with little warning and required a quick next adaptive move. Designing the career of the super clerk, The new job, relative to the old clerical job, required a much higher level employee in terms of skill, level, and pay. Page 70. And pay grade. That part was manageable, but it was not clear what the career path of these super clerks would be in the future. The old clerks were dead ended in their jobs and did not mind the relatively low pay and lack of promotion. They were well adapted to their role and position in the career system. But the super clerks would want advancement, and the task force would not figure out a way to advance them. The super clerks would become specialists, and the bank had no ladder for this. In fact, the bank had a highly rigid promotional and career advancement system in the managerial ladder that was strongly enforced by the human resources function. Very high level individual contributors could be given special status and pay, but there was no mechanism for dealing with highly technical individual contributors in the middle. Wow. When this lack of a career path was discovered by the task force, the whole superclerk idea was abandoned. The original clerks were retrained and even permitted to use the paper files along with the computers. After about 2 years, we were using the new system and the old number of clerks had been retrained. Apparently, this was okay with senior bank management because changing the clerk's career tracks, wages, and promotional system was not something they wanted to tackle. IT was extremely unhappy about this outcome, but they could not do anything about it. Carlos accepted it, and life went on. Wow. All right, let's get into these lessons. Lessons of the entire case. Working with Carlos was always an adventure because there were always new things he wanted to work on and new conditions to be dealt with. Over 3 years of consulting there, I learned firsthand how problem definition and technical solutions were highly vulnerable to unanticipated technological, political, and purely personal circumstances, like the sudden retirement of Carlos's first boss. So the biggest lesson was don't second guess the future. And don't make assumptions about don't make assumptions about the casual forces that may be operating. You never see the whole system, so don't second guess it either. The traditional research model, the existence of the no layoffs norm, would have been a sufficient explanation of the observed phenomenon that a potentially useful technology failed to be adopted. Had this boss not left, I would never have learned that it was not a general bank norm, and that bosses had considerable leeway in how they dealt with technologically produced redundancy. Third lesson, the discovery that the bank had no career paths for this kind of super clerk was a complete surprise to both Carlos and me. Low-level clerk specialists were easy to manage, and their careers were well understood. Super clerks of the kind that would be created by this technology would have to be better educated, would want more pay, and would be autonomous operators instead of under managerial control. Fourth lesson. So, what was really in the way of introducing the new technology was some deeper cultural problem with the entire societal technical system, specifically an inability to visualize and or adopt a less hierarchical system in which bosses might play more of a consultant role to highly paid professional operators who, like airline pilots, might spend their whole careers in some version of this new role. In fact, the no layoffs norm might have been a convenient rationalization to avoid having to change deeper cultural assumptions about the nature of work and hierarchy in this bank. Page 72, and we're coming to a close in this chapter. The next lesson is no great harm was done, but not much useful change had occurred either. And as a helper, I had to be content with just helping Carlos deal with the various events that overtook both of us. I learned the meaning of an adaptive move as contrasted with a solution. Wow. All right, chapter summary and conclusions. In this chapter, I have reviewed the sociological reality that relationships in all societies and groups can vary from negative, hostile, and exploitative to highly intimate. Each of these levels has a variety of situational rules that govern how close or distant it is appropriate to be, what it means to be more or less professional or personal rather, and what is appropriately public or private. Our normal relationships with strangers, what I am calling level one, also include transactional and professional service relationships that are governed by cultural rules of appropriate professional distance. When we get to know someone personally and can work with him or her on a more personal level, this is level two, which is essential for real help to occur. Level two, trust implies that we are willing to make promises and will keep them. Level two, openness implies that with respect to our joint task, we will share all relevant information and will not lie to one another. Suggestion for the reader: to get an insight into your own and others' views of openness and trust, find some time with a friend or colleague and ask the following questions. When you ask others for help or some service, how do you decide whether or not you can trust them? Whether or not they are telling you the truth? Ask yourself for concrete examples. Next, ask yourselves how you would go about trying to figure that out, or what kind of conversation you might consider having that would make you feel you could trust them. As you discuss this, do you begin to sense the difference between the level one formality and the level two personalization? This was so good. You know, I really enjoyed chapter 3, the need for the need for trusting and open level two relationships, because working in the field of public health, as well cosmetology, beauty services, as well advocacy, all of my relationships have to be level two. I personally have to. The formality does not work for me. When I've first started out in my careers, um, the level one is what you get firsthand. But if you really want to bring about change and develop yourself as a person and your business and your career, you're going to have to get into people's business, ask the tough questions so that changes can be made. Whether it's public policy, whether it's creating resolutions that works best for your organization, whether it's looking into what the immediate needs are of a society, of the culture. What is the culture of your organization? And what do you want it to be? Right? What are the levels of communication and respect? What are the levels of participation for real? What are the levels of openness? And so, in order for us to build effective corporations and organizations, I'm sitting here learning so much more every day about how I can provide real help faster as a humble consultant. Humble but fierce, humble but strong, humble yet dangerous in a good way, right? So, choose today to become your full potentials, do what you could do to create a better outcome in your organization, in your company, in your business, as a coach, as a mentor, whoever you are, wherever you are, teacher, preacher, politician, doctor, lawyer, nurse, aide, assistant, no matter who you are, what you do, this can benefit you. My name is Sabrina J. Lewis. I am an ambassador of wellness and beauty here for the community, for the development of community, the building up of the people. And that's my time. All right. Love life well, y'all, and live. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Oh, tomorrow we will be back at 8:30 a.m. And we're going to be in chapter 4, page 75, talking about humble consulting begins with the first conversation. I'm looking forward to that. Make sure you have your highlighters, make sure you have your pens, and make sure that you come ready, because we're going up. We're going higher. Ready for takeoff. Sabrina J. Lewis signing off. Bye for now. See you later. Thank you for joining.